evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for our webinar on becoming an FSR Global Sarcoidosis Clinic Alliance volunteer leader. I'm Indy Buchanan, Director of Patient Programs, and I'm thrilled to share more about the important and exciting ways you can make a difference in the sarcoidosis community. First, a bit of housekeeping. This is a webinar, so we'll not be able to see or hear audience members. This means if you use the raise hand function, we'll not be able to respond directly. So the chat feature does work, but only as a direct message to myself, our question and answer moderator, Kalila, and our patient speakers. So feel free to use this if you'd like to chat with us directly. I will be able to chat with you, the audience, and that's where I'll add any links discussed during the session. We'll also send out links in the post-event email along with the recording of the session. So please send your questions to the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen. And you have the option of submitting questions anonymously if you prefer. So I'd like to start by sharing some background on who FSR is. FSR was founded in 2000 by a patient and her husband, and we are the leading international nonprofit dedicated to sarcoidosis and sarcoidosis patients and research. Our mission is to find a cure for sarcoidosis and to improve care for patients with sarcoidosis. And we are driven by a cooperative, communicative, cyclical relationship between patients and research. You can see our small but mighty team here, and we are excited to share our newest team member, Rebecca Epstein-Tolkoff, our new Senior Research Manager. And you can view more about the FSR team on our webpage. So what does FSR do? We accelerate research through fellowships, pilot grants, and large grant programs. Collectively, FSR's grant awardees have gone on to be awarded more than $15 million in National Institute of Health, NIH funding, demonstrating the power and the promise of these programs. We educate patients through webinars, town halls, podcasts, and infographics. We also educate clinicians through continuing medical education programs like our Clinical Education and Engagement Series. We support patients through our patient education programs, patient navigators, and wellness programming. And we advocate for increased grant opportunities through the NIH and pharmaceutical partners to increase access to care and reduce barriers. I'm excited to now share more about the FSR Global Sarcoidosis Clinic Alliance, or FSR GSCA for short. This initiative is a member program consisting of clinics, hospitals, and individual providers committed to finding a cure and offering evidence-based, patient-centric care for those living with sarcoidosis. We are honored to share our 37 founding members here. These are the first clinics in the nation to demonstrate their commitment to patients with sarcoidosis and their loved ones. And I'll be sharing more about how you can be part of this extraordinary movement tonight. You can see the cities and states where our founding member clinics are located here. And our goal is to make the entire map, well, globe, purple with red pins. Now, I'd like to go into a little more depth about what the purpose of the FSR GSCA is. Why have all these clinics and FSR come together? I want to first share that FSR spent a year developing this initiative, spending months listening and learning from our patient, clinician, researcher, and partner stakeholders to ensure we understood the priorities of these groups and what steps FSR could take to make the greatest impact and fill the most gaps. The foundation of the FSR GSCA can be found in our 4 pillars for progress. The first pillar is to ensure sarcoidosis patients in every community have access to information, education, clinical trials, and patient support services. The next pillar is to identify, acknowledge, and support clinicians through networking opportunities, forums that enable learning, sharing, and advancements in finding a cure and continuity of care. The third pillar is to accelerate research through FSR's global assets and funding through a structured research initiatives with strategic approach driven by measurable data and insights. And finally, the FSR GSCA contributes to business outcomes through patient benchmarks and community health improvement services. So what does this all mean for patients? Well, patients will have access to information related to each of the Alliance member clinics that provides an overview of the clinic services, trials, and supports available there. Patients will have access to local peer-facilitated topic-based support groups and community outreach leaders who will work to increase awareness through sharing their story and holding events. There will also be opportunities for patients to make their voice heard throughout programmings and initiatives. All of this, in addition to FSR's other educational and support programming, increases access to care, support, and clinical trials for patients. One thing we consistently heard from patients and caregivers was that they wish their doctors had more access to information about sarcoidosis. And from clinicians and researchers, we heard they hope to share their expertise with colleagues, as well as come together to share best practices. The FSR GSCA addresses these needs through offering continuing medical education credits at our quarterly clinical education engagement series and Sarcoidosis Journal Club, and through supporting sarcoidosis grand rounds and peer case reviews. These efforts will directly impact patients by creating increased access to knowledgeable providers, resulting in better patient care. Building upon FSR's already successful research program, the FSR GSCA amplifies programming like the FSR Patient Registry through increased collaboration between clinicians and researchers. It provides opportunities to engage with big data to better understand health equity, pathways to diagnosis, and treatments, and will allow FSR to increase clinical trial recruitment and advocacy for efforts aimed at getting more funding from the NIH. All of these amplifications ultimately lead to increased opportunities for patient access to clinical trials and for clinicians and researchers to gain better understanding of diagnosis and treatment pathways. This leads the way to not only better patient outcomes, but also a cure. Now that we have the background on what the FSR GSCA is and goals of this exciting initiative, and before we get into the opportunities available to you to be part of this, I want to share a short video from FSR patient advocate, patient advisory committee member, African American Women in Sarcoidosis patient advisory committee member, and Speakers Bureau member, Gari Farrow, who would like to share her story of getting involved as an FSR volunteer. If I can get it to share.
Hello, and thank you for allowing me to appear during this webinar today. I'm a newly minted FSR patient advocate and proud to speak about FSR and my experience with sarcoidosis. Initially being diagnosed with sarcoidosis removed my voice, my power, my control over my life. Most decisions and thoughts that I have now are filtered through the lens of this disease, leaving me feeling powerless. My exposure to FSR started as a patient who was looking for more information on different drug options. I ran across an announcement that FSR was creating a patient advisory committee and looking for patients to apply. I realized that I wanted to help others along with myself in gaining knowledge and shaping how people and doctors view this disease. So I applied and thankfully was accepted. The PAC has and continues to work together to refine different communications along with our wish list of things that we would like FSR to focus on or improve. Having the ability to provide the patient's perspective is very cathartic for me. Because of the PAC, I was able to take part in 2 different drug focus groups. FSR provided prep meetings educating us on the drug development process. I'd always wondered why steroid was the only approved drug for sarcoidosis, especially since it almost guaranteed other health issues if used for months or years. Now I understand why the drug development process fails those of us with a rare disease. Because of the PAC, I was provided a gateway to the Speakers Bureau. I applied because being behind the scenes with the PAC was what I needed, but I realized I wanted more. Being on the Speakers Bureau has literally given me a version of my voice back. The voice that I had before I was diagnosed is gone, but I have a new voice that I can use to tell my story. Thankfully, FSR provided fantastic training with the living proof advocacy because it's hard to condense 16 years of my experience with sarcoidosis into a manageable and coherent 3 to 7 minutes. I was able to speak my truth at different FSR webinars and in written blog posts. FSR and the PAC know that African American women are nearly 3 times more likely to develop sarcoidosis and 13 times more likely to die from it. Yet, when looking at the interactions online, there's a lack of representation. So when FSR decided to create the Women of Color Patient Advisory Committee and ask for women to apply, well, you see the trend in my life, in for a penny, in for a pound, and so I applied. This committee has allowed me to provide my patient perspective as an African-American woman with sarcoidosis. For anyone who wonders if my experience would be different, I can tell you that it is. The Women of Color PAC has allowed us to address some of these experiences, along with providing sarcoidosis information specific to African-American women, their families, and friends. Working with the different FSR committees and experiencing the Ignore No More Twitter chat, conferences, and FSR workshops has provided countless people information on sarcoidosis and hopefully sparked a conversation, or 3. I always figured if at least one person was educated about sarcoidosis that I'd be happy. Being a part of the committees has made me very vocal about sarcoidosis, online and in person. In August of last year, I became very thankful of my involvement with the FSR committees. A coworker told me that she was going in for a biopsy, that she had had a chest CT and they suspected cancer or sarcoidosis. She came back to me and said, "It's sarcoidosis. Now what do I do?" Before working with FSR, I would have only had my anecdotal information. I directed her immediately to the FSR website and let her know about the Patient Navigator program, along with so much more information that FSR had provided. She still is scared, but knows that there are others out there that understand where she's going and the journey that she is embarked on. Being a volunteer for the FSR Global Sarcoidosis Clinical Alliance would allow you to provide information and support to anyone who wants to or needs to know more about sarcoidosis. The amount of knowledge that I've been given, as well as the resources that I've been exposed to, have helped me help others. Please continue to support FSR in their sarcoidosis journey and join as a volunteer in the Global Sarcoidosis Clinical Alliance.
I'm on mute. No matter how many times I hear Gary share that story, it is truly amazing to hear. I'm next excited to share another one of our volunteers here, Robin Gobble. Robin is, sorry guys. Robin is a patient advocate, and she is also one of our newly minted volunteer FSR GSCA community outreach leaders assigned to Johns Hopkins University. So let's hear from Robin.
My name is Robin, and I was diagnosed with neurosarcoidosis back in the fall of 2020. Being diagnosed with neurosarcoidosis was a relief and both one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me in my life. And I was lucky to be diagnosed very quickly, but I also quickly found out that there wasn't a lot out there about sarcoidosis. You know, in looking for articles, looking for research, looking for trials, especially for neurosarcoidosis, there wasn't a lot out there. And I came upon, in my searches, the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. And I saw they had a patient navigator program. One of the things that also happens when you get diagnosed is all of a sudden you have a plethora of doctors to see. I call it the month of ologists. So there was the neurologist, the pulmonologist, the ophthalmologist. There were just all these doctors, and I didn't even know what questions to ask. So I filled out the form for a patient navigator and was connected with Regina. And Regina, though sometimes she says, "I don't feel like I did anything for you," she did so much for me, just knowing that there was someone else there that got it. And I also connected with another patient who had neurosarcoidosis and was a part of the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. And she also was a big, big help for me. And we found that we had a lot in common. And so here I had two connections into the Foundation for Sarcoidosis, and I really didn't feel alone. The more I got involved, I felt more community, because it's very isolating, especially being diagnosed in the middle of COVID. You know, I was working from home. I couldn't see my friends, and friend groups changed, and I really felt a little less alone. So I decided to become a patient advocate. And being a patient advocate, I have gotten so much from, because I've learned a lot from my other friends who are patient advocates as well. So I've made a lot of friends. I also learn things from them. I learn about how I'm talking to my doctors. I learn about new trials or new medications, or, you know, new ways. And I also get a lot of motivation from them. Fatigue is a big part of my journey, and they also help lift me up and keep me going. So when FSR decided to do this global clinical alliance, I really wanted to be a part of it. Johns Hopkins is very close to me. I see the doctors in the sarcoidosis clinic, and I really want to help be that connection between FSR and the clinic, and help others as they go through their journey too. So at the end of the day, I would say that if you want to get involved, get involved. You're not alone when you're a part of this, and you get a lot of support as well. And I can say that I'm very, very grateful and happy that I got involved.
Mute again, guys. Gosh, thank you so much, Robin, for that amazing testimonial on how you got your to your journey. No matter how many times I hear from patients, it's always so great to hear these stories. So thank you so much. We're so grateful for them for sharing this. And there'll be an opportunity to ask questions of both Robin and Gary later in the webinar. So stay tuned for that. So now I want to talk about how you can get involved. The first opportunity I want to share is our community outreach leader role. Now, we heard Gary share that she felt like sarcoidosis took her voice. Undoubtedly, there are more of you out there on this webinar today who feel the same. Imagine being just like Gary and stepping up to take back your voice. Becoming a community outreach leader provides that opportunity. Community outreach leaders will work with FSR, their FSR GSCA member clinic, along with their local volunteer leader team to raise awareness through sharing their story, engaging with their communities, and organizing educational and fundraising events. And like Robin mentioned, joining this community, all of these voices together, sharing varied experiences, dealing with this disease will be massively impactful. So if you're someone who's looking to shift the world's understanding of sarcoidosis, this role might be for you. But maybe you feel like you're better suited to supporting and educating others and walking with them on this sarcoidosis journey. The support group leader role might be right for you if that's the case. The support group leader will work in teams of 2 to organize and facilitate monthly groups at the FSR GSCA member clinics. These groups will be peer-led, so patients for patients, and will be topic-based. So each month will have a different focus, as well as facilitate community building and networking. As Robin mentioned, sarcoidosis can be a lonely disease, and both she and Gary mentioned hunting for resources they could count on. Imagine having the support of other sarcoidosis patients and caregivers, as well as the education you need as soon as you were diagnosed. This is what our support group leaders will be doing across the country. So if you believe that no patient should struggle to find the resources and the support they need, and you're ready to create a community built on education and support, being an FSR GSCA support group leader might be the right fit for you. Now that we have an idea of what the 2 different roles will be doing in their communities, I want to talk a bit more about how we'll be working together locally to achieve their goals. First and foremost, for each FSR GSCA member clinic, there will be 2 community outreach leaders and 2 support group leaders. This will create your FSR GSCA team. So you're definitely not alone, and your FSR GSCA team will be working together with FSR and your assigned clinic to make a difference in the lives of people affected by sarcoidosis in your community. And when I say you're not alone, I really mean you're taking up one of these roles means you're joining the great big sarcoidosis family. Along with your FSR GSA team, you'll be connected with local FSR patient advocates and navigators who are working on a national level. And more than that, you'll be connected to all community outreach leaders or all support group leaders. So every quarter, you'll join to hear about what others are doing, share best practices, gain valuable continued training, and truly have an opportunity to join a massive community who not only gets it, but who are also all working toward making a difference just like you. So we've shared a bit more about the roles, how you'll be joining the community, and now I want to share how FSR and the Alliance member clinics will be supporting your team's impact. FSR will provide training from experts in communications on media, impactful story crafting for special audiences, for specific audiences, event planning, as well as provide tools and resources such as events in a box and setting up your outreach plans and support your fundraising efforts. Support group leaders will be trained on facilitation and moderation for both virtual and in-person events. FSR will also provide resources and tools for support group leaders, such as the Getting Started Toolkit, education materials, and connections to partners for presentations at their groups. You'll also have access to a dedicated FSR staff member who will be supporting your efforts and connecting you with the resources you need. Your assigned clinic will have a dedicated liaison there to support your efforts when planning events and staying apprised of services and supports available through their health system. They'll be able to connect you with experts and key staff inside their clinics. You'll be able to host experts in sarcoidosis and other areas like mental health, financial services, patient advocacy, and more at your support groups or patient education events. And all of these efforts are meant to support your impact. FSR also will provide exclusive volunteer leader resources. These resources are meant to support your efforts and include a unique FSR volunteers email address, business cards, prepaid Visa cards to cover approved upfront expenses for in-person support group events, opportunities to submit for mileage reimbursement for approved in-person support groups and events, and an FSR GSCA themed tablecloth and signage for in-person events such as health fairs and other activities. We already mentioned the all volunteer quarterly meetings, which will be hosted by FSR and facilitated by us and provide additional opportunities for training every quarter. Additional opportunities also include an opportunity to attend the 2024 in-person training at Cleveland Clinic and complimentary invitation to the 2024 annual FSR Research Gala for those volunteers who report consistently and on time. So what should you do now? Well, I'd say you definitely shouldn't wait to apply. FSR is conducting rolling applications and awarding positions as we move toward the February 3rd deadline. To ensure you're considered for a position you most want, I encourage you to apply as soon as possible. Once positions are filled, we'll need to create wait lists. So you can go to our website now and click Apply Now at the top of the banner, or click Take Action and choose Become a Sarcoidosis Leader in your community. Additionally, we'll send a link out with this recording of the webinar, and it will be added to the chat. All right. So with that, I want to bring on our two speakers, Gary and Robin, and Kalila Cohen, FSR's Diversity and Inclusion Programs Consultant, to join me for our Q&A.
Hello, everyone. As Mindy said, I am Kalila Cohen. We do have a few questions in the Q&A, so I'll go ahead and get started. So our first question comes from San Antonio, Texas. There are no sarcoidosis clinics here. The closest one is 3 hours away. I would love to join as a support group leader. Can I be placed on a wait list for when something comes up in San Antonio? Also, can one person be both positions?
Oh, wow. Those are two really great questions. So certainly I would encourage you to go ahead and apply. There is an opportunity to say, I don't have an FSR GSCA clinic in my area, but I'm willing to share this opportunity with the clinic I do see. And that may mean that the FSR is able to reach out to your clinic and bring them on as a member. And then there would be an opportunity for you to become a support group leader in San Antonio. Additionally, can you hold both positions at once? There is, you guys, I didn't touch on this directly in the slide, but there's a time commitment, and the time commitment for support group leaders is 6 to 8 hours a month. And the time commitment for community outreach leaders is a minimum of 5 hours a month. And when you're hosting events, that's going to go slightly up. So I would really recommend we don't hold two positions at the same time and kind of choose to focus on one position. In the future, that may change, but for this year, as we're rolling these programs out, we would like people to focus on the one position that they're most interested in. So.
Thank you, Mindy.
Yeah.
So you touched on the time commitment. That was another question that came up. And in the same vein, I guess, of describing the requirements, I'll just pose this question. Someone asked, so what are the requirements for being a volunteer leader?
Yeah, so also I just want to add, Gary, by the way, I think there's something happening with the back of your screen. We lost Gary for a minute. I want to add that, even though you're in to go back to the previous question, I will get to the other one clearly just a second. I just wanted to add a point. You can also support, you can help support the support group leaders who are working, or the community outreach leaders who are working in the other cities as well. So there are other opportunities to volunteer with FSR. We'll include those links in the post-webinar email as well. And I'm also always happy to talk to people independently and discuss what options might be available to you outside of just this specific option. So definitely there's opportunity to support one another. So requirements for being a volunteer leader. So you definitely need to be someone living with sarcoidosis or actively caring for someone with sarcoidosis. You do need to live near or be seen at one of the FSR GSCA member clinics. And you really need to have a passion for making a difference. I suspect most of you on this webinar already have that. And you can also find more about this very specific requirements on our webpage, which has been added to the chat. There's some additional requirements, such as not holding leadership positions at another sarcoidosis nonprofit, and some things like that. So those are the general requirements to be a volunteer leader, and then really bringing your experience and your passion to the role. We are really looking for a wide range of diverse experiences, and we hope that people really, take a chance in applying.
All right, so we have a few other people in Delaware and Orlando who had similar questions. So I hope Mindy was able to answer that there are still ways for you to engage. And as she said, you're still able to, apply for future options. In terms of the Delaware question, there are clinics in Philadelphia, which is near there. So this person would really like to be a part of this. Is it possible to be a volunteer leader in a Philadelphia clinic? So if they're kind of in a neighboring city.
Well, so I see what you're saying. Yeah. So there is we do have an FSR GSCA clinic in Philadelphia. And so even if you're not, so I guess the question is, if you're not seen at that FSR GSCA clinic, member clinic, but you live in Philadelphia, you can apply and we would assign you to that clinic. So we would just ask you to think about, if you don't go to that clinic, how might you represent both FSR and that clinic that you don't specifically go to? So hopefully that's helpful there.
Great. And Gloria Simmons would like to know if there are other clinics in the Chicago area other than Northwestern.
Yeah, so University of Illinois Chicago, the Bernie Mac is also an FSR GSCA member clinic. And so that would be the other Illinois or the Chicago area clinic.
Okay. Keep the questions coming. These are great questions. I have another for you. What geographic areas would I serve?
Again, it depends on where you live, right? So if you're living in an area where there's a clinic, you would serve the sort of community or the city where your clinic is based. So in some cases, that might be a large part of a state. It might be a whole city. It might be also just sort of where your connections are as well. The goal is to really create as much outreach in the community to bring people into that clinic, to bring people into the support group programming as possible. So community outreach leaders in particular would be reaching out to the community groups that you belong to. So for instance, maybe you belong to a religious organization, or you belong to a fraternity or sorority, or you go into a chamber of commerce or some of these other big groups. We would be asking you to go out and speak to these groups and bring them information and raise awareness about sarcoidosis. And like Gary mentioned, she's at work and someone was diagnosed with sarcoidosis and they knew to go to her because she has spent that time sharing her story and creating that ripple effect so that people know that she exists and she's able to support that person through that. So that's really the goal of the community outreach leaders. And so your geographical area is really based on where you are physically, who your connections are through, where your connections are, and which clinic you're assigned to.
Okay, the next question, and this could possibly go to one of our advocates, but we'll see. How is this different from the FSR Patient Advocate Program?
Yeah. So the Patient Advocate Program, the advocates are not tied to a specific clinic. So they're not working directly with a clinic liaison. They're not focused on some of the initiatives that we'll be putting forward for the community outreach leaders and support group leaders. All support groups will be run through the FSR GSCA moving forward. We will have, we have a couple patient advocates who run support groups who will continue to run those in their communities, but they will be tied to one of the Clinic Alliance members. So that's really how it's different from the advocate program.
So Mindy, I'll add, I spend most of my time on Inspire, the Stop Sarcoidosis chat. So I spend a lot of time answering questions from people or giving support to people on there. I'll spend my time maybe a story about my journey in support of a program or initiative that FSR has. So I think that's how it's a little bit different. It's more geared, it's not as outwardly geared to the community as the advocates are.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. That's right.
Okay, and I have a question for one of our advocates. What is the training like? So what is
I'm actually going to pass. What's that, Kalila?
I was saying, what is the advocate training, the patient advocate training like?
Or the volunteer leader training, you mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm actually going to, it's 2 days long. So it's February 25th and 26th. But I actually want to bring on, is Gary still with us here? I know, but we just lost her.
I am still here.
Okay,
my
great.
Video is just a little grouchy right now.
All right, fair enough. I'd love to bring on Gary and Robin to kind of talk about that question a little bit in terms of they've both been through multiple layers of FSR training programs, and it would be great to kind of hear from you guys and share your experience with the FSR training and what's that like for you.
Well, I guess I can go ahead and start and then throw to Robin. For me, there was multiple trainings with very specific topics. The patient advocate training was a 2-day course, just like with the Global Alliance volunteer session, and it actually covered the requirements that FSR had, education on, I can't even list the number of different things about drug studies, about making sure that you have done the research, a little bit of them, I don't want to call it a media training because there is a separate media training, but that we touched on a little bit of that and how to handle yourself speaking in front of someone and or how to respond to maybe possibly a negative response to a post about FSR. And of course, all of the different education and patient resources available from FSR that you could pass that information on to others? I think Robin might have a different one, especially being a part of the GSCA.
Yeah, so the training kind of varies. The training annually was very much like Gary said, we get training on how to write our stories. We get training on the different initiatives that are coming up and how we can support those initiatives. We get training on fundraising as well. We do have, we do a little bit of fundraising as patient advocates. And so we get some training and some ideas, and we swap and brainstorm about how we can do that piece. And then the media training, what I would say to that is one of the best trainings that I had really was Jim's training on how to get a proclamation. I had no idea how to do that. And Jim gives this great presentation on how you can get a proclamation in April for sarcoidosis awareness in your city or your county. So it just depends really on what's coming up. You definitely have support from FSR, and you definitely have support from the other patient advocates. I've never reached out to someone that hasn't answered me. So, and I have lots of questions. As to that.
That is true. And just so everyone's referencing here, Jim Kuhn is one of our patient advocates and patient navigators. And so, I think that speaks, Robin's a really great point. I think that speaks to the opportunity that FSR creates even from within our own community pool of volunteers. When volunteers go above and beyond and have learned best practices, we create opportunities for them to teach and share those with other volunteers, because we do believe that folks who have been doing the work are often very well versed and the best people to share how to do that with the other people who are in the same boat. So thank you for that addition, Robin. That was a great training.
Thank you for those responses. This question comes from Barbie Hayes. Would each person be assigned a go-to person for support, questions, etc.? Perhaps a supervisor?
Yeah, so there's a dedicated FSR staff person who you'll have for questions or support or needs. And then if you have specific questions, like for instance, you have an issue with the room that the clinic has set up for you, then you would talk to your clinic liaison about that. So there's kind of two. So there'd be the FSR person who all the volunteers report back to. So that would be the sort of supervisor, I guess, if we're to use that word. And then your clinic liaison is there to help support you in terms of what you need from the clinic itself, like booking rooms or finding us an expert.
Great. Okay, so this question, I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah. Once the deadline for application passes, will there be interviews for the volunteer positions? If so, when can we expect to hear about the interviews?
Yeah, because the interviews are rolling, and I would say if you're in Utah, we definitely have a clinic in Utah. You should definitely apply. Most times if people have applied, we get back to them. Now that we're getting through the interview process, it just takes a few days for us to review their application and decide if people are moving on to interviews. And from there, we move them on through that process. So we are doing the rolling process. That's how Robin is already sitting in this position, because she's been through the application and interview phase and was awarded the position. So I would say don't wait until February. Technically, application deadline is February 3rd. So we'll be doing interviews through, I believe, the 7th of February officially. So anybody that applies like that late will have opportunity for interview and for placement, but don't wait, because as more people get involved, as the momentum builds, we'll end up putting people on wait lists for opportunities that you could have potentially had.
Yes. Thank you for that. We received a couple more questions asking about if there are clinics in your areas. If you visit the website, I posted again our URL here in the chat. You can see our list of members to see if we have any Clinic Alliance members close to you. And that will help answer those questions for you. This is a good question, especially considering what we went through this week. So being a patient organization, of course, we're dealing with patients who are not healthy all of the time. And so this is a big commitment. And so one of the questions is, what happens when a flare occurs?
I have an answer for that, but I want to actually ask both Robin and Gary to answer that, because as people who've been volunteering with FSR, I think they're in the best position to share about their experience with that and working with FSR during those times. So since Gary answered first last time, let's go to Robin first and then Gary.
Thanks, Mindy. Thanks, Kalia. What I would say about that, and we all have them, I'm actually having a slight flare today, is there is backup, and you have people that you can rely on. So, you know, with the patient advocate role, I kind of work, you know, to my advocacy goals when I have the time and I feel my best too. I also have a lot of support from my family and from my kids and from my job. My job was amazing, especially when the fatigue is at its worst. So what I would say is that when there's a flare, you just have to reach out to somebody and talk about it and talk through whatever is due. And, you know, that we're here as a team and a family to support each other. And that's kind of what we'll do.
Gary?
And there's two of each position. So you're not doing it by
and to tag on with what Robin said, I have a plan. I generally, my infusion happens every 2 months. So I always know that around a certain time, I'm not going to be useless, but I'm not going to be as effective. So during those times, I don't volunteer as much, or I try and get the tasks that I want done by a certain time before that happens, because I know it's just, I'm not going to be as functional. Like Robin said, you're not here alone in this, and there are so many people within FSR. So if you've made a commitment to something and you physically cannot meet it, just make sure you're keeping FSR in the loop. I guarantee you that if Mindy isn't available, Kalila is available. If it isn't Kalila, it's Trisha. There's so many different people on top of the advocates, on top of the other members that you're going to be working with. Somebody is always able to help. But to me, it's having a plan in place to know, what do I need to do if things don't go right? Because with sarcoidosis, more times than not, things are not going to go the way you want them to go. And I have something in place already, so I know what to do when things don't go right.
I'm going to piggyback on what Gary said, because as a patient, even as in the patient advocate role, we set goals every month and they're personal to us. Like, what are we going to do? And I think that planning and that goal setting is kind of important, especially like Gary said, you know, that infusion day comes. For me, I always know the week before my infusion, I really just want to sleep. I really don't want to be bothered with anything. So you know, you set your goals as a patient advocate, and then these other roles, you know, you'll be able to plan out and work with your partner on those. Thanks for bringing up the plan. The plan's important.
Great answer, guys. I can't add any more. The only thing I want to add there is that FSR is an organization who really does put patients first. I hope that comes across in all of our programming, but particularly in our volunteer programming, where we're asking and working with you guys on a very, you know, important level. Self-care is really important. And we always encourage all of our volunteers to tell us when you need to take that step back. I mean, all of you who registered today, right? We're expecting someone else to speak today, and that person needed to take a step back, and those are obviously okay. And that's also because there's a community of volunteers. So we were able to reach out to other volunteers and bring them on to support the webinar effort tonight. So that goes for the Alliance programming and the volunteers of the Alliance as well. That is why there's 2 positions open for each role. And that is why you have a community there to support one another. So if somebody's having a flare, there's somebody else in the group who can help support and pick those things up. And then the next time might be somebody else, and then that person gets to pick up. So again, that is something that we really do support. And we really encourage our volunteers to be really open and honest with us about, where their boundaries are and where they're really struggling, because we can't help you unless we know. And if we know, we're always there to help you.
Yeah. I'll piggyback as the 4th person to jump in. Definitely everything that, that they've said, but, just the biggest thing I want to underscore of what Mindy just said is communication. Just letting us know if you're starting to feel overwhelmed even. And that's important to recognize, because sometimes, especially when you're new, you get in and you want to say yes to everything, and the requests and opportunities will continue to flow. And then you'll realize, oh my goodness, I'm overwhelmed, and we don't want, volunteer burnout. We don't want you to do this at the expense of your own emotional or physical health. So communication is key. And we definitely have had volunteers who had to step back maybe for a couple months at some, different points, or just for a week where they couldn't do something. And as they've all shown and said, we definitely support that. But communication is key so that we're able to, fill those gaps when they're needed. So we received a couple more questions about where clinics are. So I will post the link again, but I just encourage you to visit the website. We have all of our members listed there, and you can see what the closest one to you is. If you do not have a clinic close to you, we are actively seeking more partners. So we encourage you to connect us with your local hospital. So you can also help facilitate that introduction, and we can reach out to them, and maybe they'd be interested in joining the Alliance as well. So that's an opportunity for you to engage as well. Barbie has another question. How much of a public speaking role is required for outreach leaders? Great question.
That is a great question. I want to actually go to Gari in a minute for this too, but because I know that she's done a lot of speaking for us, but I would say that it is part of the role, but again, we are looking for people to have sort of complementary skill sets in these different roles. So maybe we have one community outreach leader who's much more comfortable writing about their experience and writing op-ed pieces or blogs or doing that kind of outreach versus public speaking. And maybe one of them really likes to do public speaking. So I would say if public speaking makes you nervous, or you're not sure if you want to do it or you can do it, don't let that stop you from applying. Again, because FSR provides a lot of training around telling your story and public speaking. And I want to bring Gari in if you want to have any input on that as well, in terms of, when you guys started with the patient advisory committee and then the speakers bureau, that might have been a Herculean looking task to begin with. And I'd love to hear if you'd be willing to share sort of your process there, Gari.
Oh, sure. The living proof advocacy training, along with the media training, if my memory is correct, and you can never bank 100%, I believe there was at least 3 different sessions with living proof. I think with that was at least 2, if not 3. There were plenty of opportunities to prep before the training, so you would have something written so that you could practice it. We did almost as if a peer-to-peer kind of review. Talking amongst each other, somebody would speak, somebody would give a critique, try this, try that. Anytime it came time for one of us to actually speak live during a webinar, during a conference, we were given opportunities to practice with someone from FSR or with one of our other PAC members or the different groups of, hey, would you be willing to listen to me? And then, of course, I did the quintessential, I grabbed every friend and or family member, like, look, are you free for the next 10 minutes? Okay, look, I even recorded it once and had somebody watch it just to see what their thought was, because of course they said they couldn't make my, they couldn't meet with me that one time. I said, watch the video and tell me what you think. So practice is, I can't believe my brain just died on me. Jim from Living Proof, is that, no, oh shoot. But basically, John, thank you. I knew as I said it, I'm like, that wasn't correct. But he even said, practice while you're vacuuming. You don't have to actually hear yourself. You just want to get used to saying it out loud and finding how you speak. Because not everybody has to sound like they are a professional speaker. You just need to speak. And how you are is basically representing sarcoidosis, because you are the patient. You have that story to tell. You have that information. So it's just practice.
Great, thank you, Gari. How far in advance will you know about planned events, support group meetings, etc.? That way we can plan our appointments or infusions around those times.
Yeah, that is an excellent question. I feel like, Barbie, you're winning the question award for tonight's webinar. So great job there. So when you go to the training, as if you're a support group leader or a community outreach leader, you go to the training, we will be creating outreach plans with community outreach leaders to determine, like, what is your plan for the year? Where do you want to kind of shoot for events, or what kind of opportunities might be in your community in terms of, like, are there health fairs going on and that kind of stuff? Maybe you divide and conquer with your fellow leader. For support group leaders, we'll be having you guys come together and identify the date that works for your support group, and you'll be setting that up and setting up your support group plan for the year to determine topics, and again, looking at dates and calendars so that you can provide that to your liaison and they can help support you by setting up the rooms for that, or securing the rooms for those. So you have a lot of ability to make decisions around dates and times of events and planning that component. So FSR is not necessarily going to be dictating to you, you have to do it on this day, on this month, or whatever. We might have some dates that might be, FSR is doing something. So it might be a blackout date in terms of, like, please don't host your support group or your event at the same weekend that we're hosting our summit, our patient education summit, or things like that. But in general, you'll have a lot of ability to make decisions around what dates and times you're hosting your events.
Great. When is the actual start date for those that are accepted as volunteers?
Yeah, so actually, the start dates for community outreach leaders will roll right up into March. So the training is February 25th and 26th, and you guys will be ready to rock and roll in March. And that means that you'll be really prepped and ready to go by April's Sarcoidosis Awareness Month. And we will be expecting support group leaders to host their first support group meeting in April. So both of those roles will have continued meetings and some continued trainings after the full day trainings in February to help you get set up and to do some additional opportunities. But in general, you'll be ready to go in March for community outreach leaders, and you'll be hosting your support group leaders, your support groups in April.
And another follow-up question to that is, will the February training be in person or on Zoom?
It's on Zoom. Yeah, so 2023, we will still be virtual for training, and we will be hosting our first in-person training at Cleveland Clinic in 2024.
Great. So that should answer the question someone had, do volunteers help virtually or in person? But if you can just expound on that a little bit.
Yeah, so it depends. There's a lot of factors in when a volunteer team is doing things in person versus virtually. So an example for the support group is if your clinic that you're assigned to is not allowing in-person activities. So we do have a number of member clinics who are not allowing in-person activities. We'll be helping you get set up to do your support group virtually until in-person activities resume at the clinic. The same thing goes for events. So we will be supporting both virtual and in-person activities. And so a lot of factors go into that in terms of the comfort of the volunteers. So how comfortable are you being in an in-person event? What are the rules in your city in terms of like what's allowed. So we have to keep in mind that even though we're, sort of out of COVID, as they like to say now, we have a lot of immunocompromised patients, and, different things may change, and cities may make different rules around what's allowed as the pandemic continues to move and shift through different phases. So again, training is really meant to provide both a virtual knowledge and how to do something in person. So it's both and.
Thank you. Is there travel involved?
So there isn't. By travel, okay, so there isn't travel involved in terms of like, we don't expect you to be traveling like 5 hours to go give an in-person event. We would, again, we are trying to connect people who are in the same city as an Alliance member or within easy driving distance of an Alliance member to do in-person events. So like, I wouldn't expect people to be driving ever any more than like an hour, 45 minutes to get in. I mean, that's something, depending on what part of the world you live in, that's like, 3 miles in Chicago. So, there may be sort of traveling in terms of driving or a bus or something to get to the event within the sort of community that you live in, but we're not expecting people to be traveling from state to state or like across the state or anything like that. For the 2024 in-person volunteer training at Cleveland Clinic, obviously those who do not live in Cleveland would need to travel to get to that in-person training, but that again isn't until 2024, and people will have plenty of time and information in advance of that.
Thank you. Another question, do you have any one-off speaking opportunities to share stories?
Yeah, so we have a speakers bureau, and we also, you can apply to be a patient advocate and work as a patient advocate where we do have a training that's been recorded that you can listen to and participate in, and then work with us to raise awareness and share your story. You don't have to be attached to an Alliance member clinic to share your story. And we are always looking for great volunteers who want to do that as well.
Great. We received another question about outreach to the hospitals. Could a doctor's office be a sarcoidosis clinic, Alliance member, or does it have to be a hospital?
So I believe that our clinical alliance, our clinical engagement team will actually work with anyone you want to send them to and talk to them about that opportunity. So they may be part of, like, maybe your rheumatologist, but you're saying they work in an association, so maybe the association would like to join. So maybe just that individual person, it may be an association. So our clinical engagement team will definitely work to support that. So if you want to connect us to your clinician, we're happy to take that connection.
Great. Excuse me, I'm just working the chats here. Okay. Well, does anyone else have any other questions? It seems we have a couple minutes before we close, but if there's any last minute questions. Okay.
I did see a question in there, Clea. I do want to answer this question in terms of the training in February. It is mandatory to attend that training in full on both Saturday and Sunday. So I will share that community outreach leaders' biggest day is going to be Saturday, and support group leaders' biggest day is going to be Sunday. Both will need to be there for some period of time on both days. But in terms of like the hour differential, most of the community outreach training will be done on that Saturday with a little bit done on the Sunday morning. And most of the support group leader training will be done on Sunday with about half the day done on Saturday as the community outreach leader. So I just want to put that out there. I know that our patient advocates have, particularly those patient advocates who've been with us a long time, had the opportunity to, if they weren't able to attend the training live, to watch the recordings, to be a patient advocate, particularly if they've been with us a long time already and they have a lot of that information. That's not the case for this particular training. We will expect the FSR GSCA Alliance training leaders to be there at the virtual training in February.
Thank you. I think that concludes our Q&A. But if you have any questions, feel free to email Mindy or myself, and we'd be happy to follow up with you.
Oh, we did have one last question, Kalila, about whether or not this event has been recorded. Yes, we have recorded it, and yes, you will get it in an email with all the links tomorrow. So you'll be able to watch the whole thing from start to finish. So
All right, Kristen with the win. She snuck that one in right at 7.
did. Right at 6 o'clock.
Oh, right, 6. All
Excellent.
right.
Well, thank you so much for everyone for coming. Thank you to Kalila, our diversity and inclusion programs consultant. Thank you to Robin, our newest FSR GSCA community outreach leader with assigned to Johns Hopkins University. And thank you to Gary Farrow, our huge list of patient advocates / member of every committee we have. Thank you to all of you for coming and learning more about this opportunity. I'm excited to connect with any of you who would like to talk about these opportunities in more depth. If you do, please email me. And I hope to see all of you applying and to see all these great applications. So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful evening.